Ladies and gentlemen, it is week 2 of the NWBA Season 5. First round of games have gone through. We've got some interesting contenders. We got some teams that are on a bit of a backslide, but it's still very early in the season. Welcome to the NWBA Wonder Room, Episode 3. Week 2 is on the horizon, so on today's episode, we are going to review Week 1, the schedule, the standings, introduce the new NWBA.com power rankings, as well as go over the Pokemon of the Week, talk about who's leading the stats, look at free agency that has begun, and take a look forward to Week 2's upcoming field of play. I'm your host, King Vasser. Thank you all for watching. Let's go ahead and get right on into it. So, Week 1 is now complete. It's on the books. Some pretty standard standings, I would say. Only one undefeated Ruby League team, that being Lava Ridge Incog. Narrowly avoided getting upset by Lentimos Town. As you can see up top there, that match is highlighted with a gold outline. Those are my picks for games of the week. If they are highlighted, that means that you can find them on my YouTube and check out those matches right now if you really wanted to. So yeah, Lentimos Lava Ridge was a crazy 3-game set. Literally came down to a speed tie at the end that Lava Ridge was fortunate to win to keep their undefeated week intact. There were some other really interesting sets this week. Himalaya City and New Bark Town in a battle to avoid being winless in week 1. That was a crazy 3-game set between Trey and CJ. And then lastly, Rhino Newbark upsetting Mali City to get his first win of the season. That was a really interesting 3-game set. Yeah, I think it was a pretty interesting week of play. As you can see, Lava Ridge tops Ruby League at 3-0. A gang of 2-1 teams, including New Moon Island, Treasure Town, and Akala Island. Defending champ Sunny Shore at 1-2, along with Alfredon and Veilstone. That's a bit surprising. And then Lentimos bringing up the rear at 0-3. And then down in the Sapphire League, Himalaya and Mount Hokulani at 3-0. Makes sense. Mali City at 2-1. Burbank, Lavender Town, New Bark Town, and New Bark all at 1-2. And Himalaya City bringing up the rear at 0-3. Couple notes, New Moon Island had the best week that you could possibly have without going undefeated. 5-2 in games. Win differential is pretty solid, higher than Treasure Town's. Akala Island being able to rebound from that opening night loss to Sunny Shore, including having the head-to-head with New Moon. That's pretty substantial, I would say. Humalao just, it's same old for Kobu, right? Picking up right back up where he left off, 3-0, plus 25. Just, right out the gate, super strong. Kevin, a bit of a squeaker, 2-1, only plus 4 in win differential, but 5-2 in games. Win differential doesn't matter as long as you're winning sets and games, right? So, that's par for the course for him. And the New Bark Town and New Bark, funnily enough, being almost the exact same at 2-5 in games and win differential pretty close. And then Himalaya City at -9, not as bad as some of the other win differentials. Funnily enough, despite the fact that they lost to New Bark Town, they were up in the win differential. Those don't happen very often. They do every once in a while. It is pretty interesting to see. So yeah, that goes for week 1 schedule and the standings. Moving on to our Pokemon of the week, just to recap the best of the best in the league. We do this every week for every season. In Ruby League, the award goes to Lava Ridge's Cleavor. Had just a monster week, 32 points, which currently leads the NWBA. 14 KOs, which is good for tie for second, as well as 7 assists, which is good for tie for third. Stone Axe has been getting a lot of work. This thing's usually, Aver's been usually running Scarf on it, and it's been picking up kills because of Stone Axe. It's picking up the assists that, goes a long way. It's just, Stone Axe is such a beautiful amazing move, and we are seeing it maximized by Lava Ridge. And then that 4.6 point per game. Good for third in the NWBA. I believe Cleveland played a full slate of 6 too, so that's pretty impressive. So Cleveland leads the way in the Ruby League. Over in Sapphire, the award goes to Basket Legion F. This was a bit closer of an award. Typhlosion H when Humalau was in contention for this one. But Basket Legion F, 14 KOs, which is tied for second in the NWBA. 24 points, which is good enough for third. 4 points per game, which is tied for fourth. And then 2.3 KOs per game, which is tied for third. I think that the fact that it had the numbers that it had in more games than Typhlosion H is what gave it the nod over, but both were very deserving mons. And I think that, you know, Cleavor and Basket Legion F will be leading the way for probably the rest of the season, you know. Obviously, we don't have any type of MVP betting, but, you know, coming out the gate with Week 1 Pokemon of the Week is probably a good bet to get you that MVP award, right? Like, these are definitely the clubhouse leaders to start the season. Absolutely. Now, that being said, let's move on to the brand new NWBA Power Rankings. This is going to be done every week as per usual, but this time we get to make a bit of a show out of it. So, as you can see, you have the teams, their rankings, their current record, as well as their record in the previous week. And then those little bars to the side typically indicate movement. We didn't do a preliminary power ranking just because that's really hard to tell with rosters and players and all of that, right? But now that we have some games under our belt, we can accurately rank, you know, just a little bit of to test the waters, so to speak, and get a feel for which teams are on the rise and which teams are on the decline. Top 3, of course, is going to be your undefeated teams, Humalau, Lava Ridge, and Mount Hokulani. I think that's, you know, pretty set in stone. A gang of teams at 2-1, I would say that Treasure Town is probably the best out the gate. That win on Sunny Shore, I think, matters a lot, considering, you know, again, that is the defending champion that we're talking about. And their only loss was to Lava Ridge. So I think that's, you know, a pretty solid week for 2-1. New Moon Island at 5, that might seem kind of weird considering that they lost the head-to-head to Ocala Island, but again, I think the win on Sunny Shore, the defending champ, matters a lot. And the way that they won as well, just complete domination against Sunny Shore and Veilstone, compared to Ocala Island, which again went 2-1, but you know, they had to go to game 3, got swept by Sunny Shore, and their one win was against Lentamaz, which, as you can see, is bringing up the rear in 0-3, so not as strong of a 2-1, but still, you know, week 1 above 500, that's definitely good enough to get you in the top half of the league. 6 is definitely no place to scoff at. And then at 7, you have Mali City. Again, 2-1. Bit of a weaker schedule out the gate. I know it's, you know, that's kind of a bit of an unfair assessment considering that you don't have time for those other teams to really pick up wins. But, you know, lost to New Bark in an upset. And their 2 wins were against, I believe, Burbank and let's see here. Yeah, Burbank and New Bark Town, which, you know, all 3 of those teams finished at 1-2. So, you know, it's still so again, you play who you play in front of you. 2-1 is still great. So that's still good enough for 7. Sunny Shore, out of the many teams sitting at 1-2, I think is probably still the best, just because, you know, champions advantage, right? It was tough sledding, but they had a rough schedule, right? You had to play Treasure Town, you had to play New Moon Island, you had to play Ocala Island. That's 4, 5, 6 right there. So I think going 1-2 with that stretch isn't that big a deal. So that's why Sunny Shore sits at 8. All Fernanda sits at 9 with losses to Treasure Town and what was the other loss? Lava Ridge, right. So, you know, again, their 2 losses were to 2 good teams, beat Veilstone in the head-to-head, so that puts them at 9. Burbank at 10 by virtue of being able to beat Lavender Town. That's why they are above them on the rankings. Losses to Humalau and Mali City, whereas Lavender Town had losses to Humalau and Burbank. So, you know, I think 1-2 is, you know, it's still early in the season, right? So just because they're low in the power rankings doesn't really mean much. There's like so little space separating these teams that it's fine. Veilstone at 12. Newbark, despite the fact that they upset Mally City, I think that's more of a misplay on Mally City than it is good play on Newbark. But it was, first week for a brand new GM. So I think as the season goes on, Rhino's going to get better and better. And we can definitely see more of a rise out of him in the coming weeks. And then Newbark Town at 14 by virtue of barely squeaking out a win against Humala City. And again, they were still negative in the win differential in that set. So again, a win is a win. And 1 and 2 is better than 0 and 3. But I do think that as a result, they bring up the rear for the 1 and 2 teams. And then lastly, Len Tomas and Humala City. 0 and 3. Again, 0 and 3, nowhere near the end of the world. We have seen good teams start poorly and go on to finish very well by season's end. I believe there was a season in which Kami started off 1 and 4 and still made it to league finals. Very first season started off 0 and 3 and ended up making it to the NWBA finals. So, just because you start off poorly doesn't mean anything, but this is just an assessment. If we had to rank every single team right now, this is how the rankings would go. Now, on to our weekly stat leaders. Just a quick, re-over of what's happened this week in the NWBA. Starting off, you have KO leaderboard Veluza for New Moon Sawada Waddlers at the top at 15. Was a strong candidate for Pokemon of the Week. I believe that if Cleavor hadn't got the assist that it got, it would have very much won. But it didn't, so as a result, that goes to Cleavor, who finished second in KOs, tied with Basket Legion. Weirdeer with a nice strong 12, putting it high up on the leaderboard at 4th. And then lastly, Tauros, Paldean Blaze up at number 5 with 11. So that's 2 Lava Ridge members that are already top 5 in KOs. As well as 5 mods that we have never seen before. The old guard, the real strong contenders that we normally see dominate the KO leaderboard, hasn't really been seen yet. We've got, a lot of new blood taking over early, which I think is nice to see. Over in the assist column, Yuxi and Bronzong tied with 11 assists, leading the way for their teams. Again, the aforementioned Cleavor at 7, as well as Heatran for Akala Island. And then lastly, at 5 assists, there are many mods. It's a 3-way tie between Tinglu of Humalau, Sandy Shocks, and Glamora of Verbank. You will see this whenever there is a tie in 5th place, because it's just easier than trying to fit every single mon that gets tied over there. As for the straight up points leader, Cleavor leads with 32 due to points and assists, Veluza at 28, Basket Legion F at 24, Weirdeer at 21, and Typhlosion H up at 20, despite the fact that I believe it only played 4 games as opposed to everybody else playing 6. That's very impressive. As a result, Typhlosion H is tied with the lead in points per game, along with Toxtricity of Treasure Town with 5 apiece. That's 2 KOs, or 3 KOs and a death, or 2 KOs and assist. Either way, that is incredibly good efficiency. Cleavor sitting at 4.6. Veluza, one of the few mons that sits at 4.0. As well as Reggie Drago of Treasure Town, Bronzong of Mally City, and Basket Legion F again. And then lastly, KOs per game, just straight up, how many kills can I get right now? Toxtricity and Typhlosion H, of course, lead with 2.5. Basket Legion F sits at 2.3, as well as Reggie Drago. And lastly, Veluza at 2.1. So, get used to seeing the same mons typically, right? Because typically the stats that we want to focus on are KOs, assists, points per game, and KOs per game. In future weeks, we will show the entire leaderboard to include total games played, total deaths, usage rate, all the other fun little weird stats. But again, it's the beginning of the season, so there's not really much of a point in showing them, but we will get to those in due time. So, we look forward to free agency, which opened on Sunday. Obviously free agency is a rolling process, right? It happens throughout the week. Sunday is the big day where everything goes into effect. So we are highlighting the 6 most important free agency decisions that happened on Sunday. And then in the coming weeks, we will typically have more Pokemon to show just because free agencies, happens a lot, there's going to be a lot more transactions. There are going to be some transactions that have already been made this week that won't go into effect until next week. So there's not really that much to talk about for the time being. As for the changes that have been made, Treasure Town opts to swap out Iron Thorns for Hippowdon as an EX pick. Decided that Iron Thorns was really hard to fit on a team. There was just never really an opportunity to get that thing to sweep and set up. And believes that the physical bulk that Hippowdon brings, because Hippowdon is a very good physical bulky mon, as well as a pretty solid physical attacker as well, is going to, pay more dividends for this team in the long run. I like that decision. I think it makes a lot of sense. We will be seeded to see if ZB opts to run Sandstream. I know in the few games that Chris has ran Tyranitar, he has opted for Unnerve instead because he just doesn't want the weather damage. And I don't think that's I think that's a pretty, reasonable idea. So we'll see what ZB does with Hippowdon. Akala Island opts to swap out Toadschool for Meloetta. This one is interesting. Toadschool, the only hazard remover on the team currently. And Akala Island says, nah, I'm not worried about it, and goes with Meloetta, very strong on the special side, both attack and defense, but also has the unique ability to use Relic Song and then transform to Meloetta Pirouette, in which it becomes a physical sweeper as opposed to a bulky special attacker. So that's a really interesting mix-up. We'll see what Akala Island does with Meloetta in what is already a pretty balanced / bulky offense team in the first place. Humalau opts to replace Avalugg with Cryogonal. Just have the exact same role, right? Take hits and rapid spin. But Humalau, knowing that Chestnut is already a very strong mon, and having a low Momola, decides that it doesn't need to triple down on physical defense, instead goes the opposite way and gets Cryogonal for special defense, which I think is a really smart idea. Types are the same. Cryogonal also has the added benefit of having Levitate, which I think will pay more dividends than Sturdy will. And again, just being able to rapid spin and being able to soak up special hits like it's nothing and recover them off. Veilstone opts to swap out Bisharp for Lucario. I think this is just more of a personal decision, because these two mons function decently similar, right? Where they're more like setup sweepers. The thing is, Bisharp doesn't have the ability to run physical or special that Lucario does. And I think Will just wasn't really interested in trying to run Eviolite Bisharp. So, I think I can understand the thought process there. And, he's had some troubles this season thus far with trying to make the terrain setup offense work. So I think having a mon that can just come out and hit things without needing terrain setup is a pretty reasonable decision for him to make. New Moon Island, very interesting decision. And I think probably the single best free agent move thus far. Swaps out Mousehold for Mew. Mousehold, it does one thing, right? You tidy up and you population bomb. That's what Mousehold does. And as a result, that mon is extremely one-dimensional. If you have a ghost type, it can't really do much to it. If you have a bulky steel type or a mon that has a rocky helmet, Mousehold can't really do much of anything. So Nico decides to swap it out for the ultimate wild card. Mew can learn any move in the game, as long as it's a TM, or just a regular learnable move. And I think that is a much better usage of a UU slot for his team, especially when you consider that Tornadus T and Gyarados are pretty solid mons in their own right. So that creates a pretty strong UU core, and it's essentially a better Uxie as well. I wouldn't be surprised if New Moon Island drops Uxie for a different PU mon or a different NU mon in the future, just because Mew can do pretty much what it wants to do, but a little bit better, because it has not as much bulk, but it still can be very bulky, and it can do a lot. It has way better support moves. It can be offensive if you want it to be offensive. So I really like that move. And then lastly, Lavender Town opting to switch out Glastrier, which is typically one of their favorites for Articuno. I think that makes sense. Glastrier on paper seems like a really strong option, right? It's a legendary. It's got really good physical stats. But the fact that it's ice type, just mono ice, it just doesn't get it done, unfortunately. So Logan decides to opt for a bit more actual utility and brings in Articuno, which I think makes a lot more sense. It's a good special wall. Just it can recover, it can haze, it can do all the stuff that you would want a Pokemon to do. And it's still an ice type, so like if he really needs an ice type, Articuno is right there. And because it's, part flying, obviously you would have to run heavy duty boots, but you were running boots on Glacier anyway, so it doesn't really change much outside of the fact that there's more longevity on the team now. So I like that as well. I don't think there was a single free agency move that made me think, man, that's very questionable. I think all of these are fairly solid. Obviously, there are some that are more risky than others. Obviously, the Toad School pick in particular. But I do think that these are all pretty solid mons that I wouldn't have been surprised if they got picked up at some point anyway. And they got picked up right now. So these mons will all be eligible to play this week. So we will probably see a few of them, up on some matches that end up going up on YouTube. And so lastly, now that we've covered everything for week 1, let's get into the week 2 schedule and highlighted matches that I think are going to be pretty important for the upcoming week. It's the first season of interleague play, so you're going to start seeing some Ruby League teams and Sapphire teams go head to head. There's a lot of interesting matchups that are going to take place as a result. Tonight's Versus Seeker, we have a 3-game lineup, no interleague matches, but still some pretty interesting intra-league matchups. First up is going to be Humalau and Mount Hokulani, 2 3-0 teams, and I think what is like the highlight match of the Sapphire League. Kobu and Kami, I believe, typically go back and forth. I think Kobu has a slight edge, but again, 2 3-0 teams going head to head, so obviously it's going to be a really big litmus test to see who takes that early lead in the Sapphire League. Over in the Ruby League, a match that is also going to be a Versus Seeker, that's going to be the final match, Lava Ridge and New Moon Island. Lava Ridge being 3-0, New Moon Island being 2-1, having the win on Sunny Shore, and only loss being the 3-game matchup against Akala Island. So New Moon Island has an opportunity to say, hey, I've got as good a shot as anybody's winning this league if they can knock off Lava Ridge. And obviously Lava Ridge is the only 3-0 Ruby League, has a slight lead on that league. And if they were to beat New Moon Island, then it's like, hey, ain't none of y'all are gonna knock me off this throne. So this is a big statement game for both teams to take the lead. And then lastly, like I said there, I think there are some pretty interesting interdivisional matchups, right? Lava Ridge does have to play Mount Hokulani, so that's going to be a massive one, right? Humala has to play New Moon Island, which is another big one. Mali City Alfrenada, I think, is going to be like a super interesting one, like a really big clash of styles. Styles mix fights always, so that's going to be really fun. But the match that I have highlighted, which I think is going to be the most interesting, is Verbank and Sunny Shore. 2 teams that off to a bit of a weaker start than I personally would have expected. Obviously, Sunny Shore, the defending champs, only 1-2. Dropping sets to New Moon and Treasure Town. And again, Nico and Zedby are very good GMs, of course. But you'd figure Spike come out the gate a little bit stronger. But early season kind of mirroring the same that we got from Mikey when he tried to defend the crown in season 3, where he started off 1-3 and then pretty much went MIA for the rest of the season. Obviously, I don't think Spike is going to go MIA for the rest of the season. Much love, God bless, any catastrophe, but still, you want to avoid getting too deep in the hole, especially knowing that Ruby League is going to be a tough out. You are going to have to fight some teams that have the jump on you. He's already down 1-2 in the league. And if you were to lose even one of the matches this week, and I know he's got one against Lava Ridge, which is another really big one in the Ruby League, it's like, man, you might just have to consider the fact that you're probably going to have to be playing in a wild card potentially. So trying to see him get back on track, I think, is a big thing to watch out for this week. And then same case with Verbank. Bit of a rough start. Obviously, Muffin has a new coach in Dom that I think is definitely going to pay off in the long run. And again, New Moon in season 3 under Dom's leadership started off 0-3. So obviously a slow start it's okay. I believe Wheezy in season 4 started off a bit slow too. So the track record shows that by mid-season, the train is going to get rolling. It's just a matter of, can Muffin get it going this week? Which I think is very much possible because, again, in the case of Vasser and Wheezy, they were able to pick it up in week 2. I believe Wheezy went 2-0 and then played really well in week 3. And then Vasser went 3-1 and then just kind of was cruising for the rest of the season. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a similar type of momentum swing from Burbank. And their league schedule is very favorable. They got Newbark, they got Himalaya City, 2 of the weaker teams in the league. Interleague is very interesting because you got Sunny Shore and Akala Island, and both those are going to be tough outs. But I think Muffin is more than capable of taking one, if not both of those, and getting right back to where she wants to be heading into week 3. So yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode. A bit shorter than the first 2, but first 2 is more, there's a lot more stuff that we have to cover, right? For the rest of the season, it's smooth sailing. You're going to see week 1 reviews, you're going to see the power ranking, the stats leaders for you to see, look ahead to the next week, all of that. Maybe some match review, every so often, if there's like a absolute, y'all have to watch this match type thing. And maybe that's something that we would consider doing near the end of the season, right? When things have cooled down. But for now, this is what you can expect for the coming weeks in Wonder Room. So that is going to do it for me here. In just a little bit, we will transition to Versus Seeker and get tonight's matches underway because they are going to be on this channel. So if you're watching on Twitch, stick around for that. If you're watching on YouTube, appreciate it. Leave a like, comment, drop a subscribe, whatever fits your fancy, and look forward to more NWBA content coming your way very soon.